I had an argument with a friend, and he's one of my best friends, so we're fine. But we had this like argument, and I'm not, as you know, we didn't study theology. Like, I'm not as philosophical as you or anything like that. But for some reason, we got onto determinism, and we're both very much believers of determinism, the concept that everything is just sort of, you know, it's going to happen. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen because it has to happen because that's what our brains are going to do. But we disagreed when I said that there is no, I suppose I was saying there was no altruistic act. I was saying that anything you do is motivated by, so that homeless person, you want to intervene because you've evolved in such a way that your body has made it painful to inhabit until you've done something about that, which is an amazing tool for humans. And we can look at that because people say, oh, that he was saying that's too negative. And I was saying, yeah, but you can look at it positively. How wonderful that our species has developed this kind of thing. Where do you stand on that? Is there anything good is it possible to have a true good thing you've done?
Well, you can also look at it neutrally, because a lot of the time when somebody says, well, that's quite a negative worldview, it's like, okay, maybe you're endowed with this superhuman ability to actually believe things are true just because they're more positive. I can't do that. If I think it's true, I just think it's true. It might be very negative, but what do you want me to do about that?
I think it's helpful to frame it positively for those who do think I don't want to believe that because it's negative.
It is, but then I don't like to patronize. Look, I'm going to tell you what I think, and if you're not if you're not into that, then fine. But if you believe you have $1 million in your bank account and you don't, and I say I'm sorry, but you're wrong, you've been scammed, and you say, well, that's a pretty negative way of looking at things. Like, okay, man, maybe it is, sure, but there's your information, take it or leave it. In my view, depends what you mean by, I mean, you said, is there such thing as a good act?
Or do we do things because it's good that we, I don't
sort
know.
I think you're talking about altruism and you're talking about goodness, and most people think that altruism is good, but they're not synonyms of each other. And as an emotivist, that would just be me going altruism, yay, you know? But altruism is a more descriptive concept. That is something like doing something for the sake of somebody else and in spite of some kind of detriment to yourself. That's like a non-moral concept, by the way, because you might think that that's a good thing, but that's not necessary to the definition of what altruism is. You can observe altruism in, fish, but you wouldn't necessarily think they've got a conception of goodness or badness, but you can still observe the behavior. So it's an identifiable concept, but it kind of depends what you mean, because if you mean altruism of the kind where you're getting nothing from it, you're doing something and getting absolutely nothing out of it for yourself, I don't think that's possible.
Yeah. Okay. So you're on my side. Can we need to bring you round to see him and tell him that?
Yeah.
Because
get him here on the table.
A lot of the arguments were things like, you would go to your mum's house because she's on her own, blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, yeah, because you feel bad for her, or because there's a tactical long-term.
Yeah. I mean, you do, why, there's lots of people at home on their own. Why don't you go and visit them?
Yeah.
Why do you go and visit your mother?
So he was saying duty, and I was saying, yes, duty is being compelled. And he didn't agree.
Yeah. I mean, and what happens if you don't do your duty?
You feel bad.
Yeah, I mean,
you had to be there.
So there's a relatively straightforward and crude way of putting it, right? And it's a bit unfair with him not being in the room, but that is ultimately what I think it essentially breaks down to. I mean, you could even still believe that there is such a real thing as duty, that actually there is a thing called morality, and that not fulfilling your duty is immoral. But then if I asked you, but why do you want to be moral? Like, wait, there's still going to be some sort of benefit to yourself. Like, I'm doing it because I want to be moral. I'm doing it because I want this. If you ask somebody why they do something, ultimately it'll be because I want this to happen. I want this. It's always an I at the basis of it. Like, in my view, preferences are necessary to do anything. If an agent doesn't have any form of preferences, it doesn't do anything. If you're sat where you are doing, what you are, and you decide to do anything, raise your hand, take a sip of water, whatever it is, it has to be because there's a way the world could be that it's not, that you'd prefer it to be. And you make it that way, You'd prefer the world to be such that your hand's in the air, so you put your hand in the air. You'd prefer the world to be such that you weren't thirsty, so you grab that water and you drink. Without any form of preference whatsoever. I'm talking like none at all, even in the menial sense of being slightly more comfortable in this position than this position kind of thing. If there was none of that, you just wouldn't act. You wouldn't be able to, because there'd be nothing to motivate the action. And if there's nothing to motivate or cause an action, the action doesn't happen, right? It requires some kind of cause or motivation. Otherwise, there's no action. And so you need some kind of personal self-facing motivation to act. I don't know if people listening will be convinced by this. There are myriad objections, but this is something that I believe and can argue for until the cows come home. But if it's true, then it would mean that, trivially speaking, when you do anything, including so-called altruistic acts, you are at least in some sense serving yourself. That's not to say you're not much more serving another person or whatever, but you are ultimately doing something for yourself. I don't see that there's any other way that it could be. I mean, the closest you can come is a thought experiment like, it's one of my favorites, actually. I mean, would you rather kill an innocent person and then immediately forget about it, or not kill the innocent person, but live the rest of your life thinking that you had?
Yeah, first one.
You'd rather kill and forget.
Yeah.
So that is a straightforwardly unaltruistic behavior, and so that requires no explanation. You're acting in self-interest. A lot of people say, no, I'd rather do the second. It's more moral, the sort of morally upstanding people, they say, not that you're not morally upstanding, you know what I mean? They'll say, no, I'd rather do the second. But even then, I think it's because in the moment of making the decision, you'd be acting in your own interest, in that you would be disgraced with yourself, even if just temporarily. And by the way, people can also misjudge. People can get it wrong. Like, it might actually be better for me to kill them and forget, but I decide that I want to do the second one because I mistakenly think that it's better for me. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But it's still the motivation is at least some sense self-serving. And people are going to say, no, you're just being cynical. This is the problem with atheistic morality. You have to understand, I really do care for other people. But listen to what you're saying. I really care for other people. If I were to put bubble wrap on a vase that I'm transporting because I don't want it to break, you say, why do you do that? I say, because I really care about this vase. What I'm saying there is I don't want it to break because I'd be upset. And when I say, well, I really care about this person, what am I saying? I don't want them to come to harm because it would harm me. A definition of friendship and love and care for another person is taking suffering in their suffering. Think about a firefighter who runs into a burning building and saves a child and comes outside, and the news media go up to him and say, oh, how did you find the bravery to go in and save that child? And the firefighter says, I couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't do that. I couldn't have lived with myself. I just had to. People think of him as more heroic for saying that. They think that's laudable. They say, well, how virtuous that he said that he couldn't live with himself if he didn't go and save that child. But what's he saying there? He's saying, I did it because otherwise I would have suffered. I did it for my sake.
I love that. And that's why I think a lot of that is why I am suspicious of morally upstanding people. And I think, or people who I think it's people who don't have that understanding about themselves, that everything they do is for a selfish reason. And I think there's a lot of people who do have that feeling, who do realize that. And that is a lot of the culture wars, in my opinion, that it comes down to that. People who think they're doing things for virtuous causes, and I don't trust it. And I think we as a people don't trust it. I've got this book coming out in a few months about the psychology of secrecy. And one of the main takeaways, people should still read the book, but one of the main takeaways is we think we tell our secrets to polite people. There are several other traits as well, but we think I'm someone who tells my secrets to polite people. And the opposite is obviously true. We don't trust polite people with our secrets. And that's because a polite person would, depending on the society and time, they would have signed up to, they'd have been a card-carrying member of the Stasi. They would have been a Nazi. They would have been all of those things because it was polite in those times. And they would have considered those actions to be morally upstanding. And I think they wouldn't have questioned them because that's a very powerful feeling. So that's why I instantly said, look, I don't really value, I would kill I don't know how to kill someone, but in the theoretical whatever, I wouldn't want to get my hands dirty, of course. I know I would, because I know that long term, I'm going to feel significantly better. And I don't need to prove anything to this particular self that's going to last for a few days till I've killed the person. And then I'm in the next bit because I don't remember it anymore.
So you'd rather an innocent person die for your sake?
It's not nice. I'm going to say yes. Yes, but I don't want people listening to go, oh my God, he's heartless. It's like, I think it would be awful. But I ask people this all the time who think that they would go with the second one. And so I say a similar thing. I say, would you, and I think this is maybe more painful to think about. So I say, would you rather somebody sort of slowly cuts your legs off? It's going to be very painful, and then you're not going to have legs for the rest of your life. Or, and it's not your fault, but there's a tsunami in a far-flung part of the world somewhere where 100 people die. And, and then you start changing the numbers and see if that makes any difference. And I think most people, as long as they didn't, especially if they didn't have to live with the guilt of it, I don't know. I don't want to live the rest of my life.
The important thing as well is to distinguish between what you would and what you should do. If you believe there's such a thing as objective ethics, there's probably going to be a should question here. Like, you should do this. And usually a should is most evident to you when it's something that, at least crudely, you don't feel like you want to do. But there's a higher order reason to do. In this case, it might be because it's subjectively the right thing to do. But if you ask people what they would do, like, yeah, I think people would, if being honest, be much more likely to say they would than that they should, if you know what I mean.
What would you do? Your first one, what was it? Kill an innocent man and not remember it?
Yeah.
Or feel for the rest of your life that you had done it?
I honestly don't know. I mean, I've asked this question so many times that I've tried to come up with ideas of what one should do, and for me, should is just an emotive expression, and so it's kind of, what do I feel most emotionally repelled by? And I think I feel more repelled by killing the person. But maybe that's like irrational, you know what I mean? Maybe, I don't know. But on the question of what I would do, you know, you kind of want to say, no, I would consign. It's almost like poetic. It's like something out of a tragedy, you know, taking this bullet for somebody, saying, no, I'm going to live the rest of my life with this guilt so that this stranger can go on and live their life. And everybody kind of wants to be the hero in that circumstance. But would you actually? I honestly don't know. It's like asking me, you know, would I run into that burning building to save that child? Like, yeah, of course I would. But would I? There's no way for me to know until I'm in that circumstance. I'd like to think that I would. Yeah. But I don't know.
I always feel like I would, but I know that I'm influenced by this weird feeling of invincibility in this particular circumstance, that I would run in and just come out with the child. If it meant I would definitely die and the kid would live, now we're talking about a different thing.
Yeah, that's also a different thing, yeah.
And also in your killing example, are you having to actually really do it, or are you just pushing a button and someone you don't know and have never met just disappears from the earth and you don't have to think about it?
But you can see why, if this is what ethics really is, just sort of how we emotionally feel about certain circumstances, people have invented these objectifying strategies to take us outside of our immediate emotional impulses, because it's obviously beneficial as a whole across a society for people to, you know, to save other people, to save more people, to sacrifice themselves, to sacrifice their legs for the lives of other people, that kind of thing. And so it's no surprise to me that people will listen to a conversation like this and think, this is not the way to do ethics. How can you even consider the possibility that that might be the right thing to do? Bear in mind that we're not considering what would be the right thing to do, just what we would do in this circumstance. But that's the confusion people make, I think. I don't know. I mean, it's fascinating to think about, but it's also relatively scary because it tells you a lot about yourself.